It's really wonderful to see so many of you here, especially after seeing such a great group of people here for Su Fujimoto. Very different, probably audience, very different presentation, but to see so many wonderful people here. For Bruno, it's really great. As you know, Bruno Latour is here as our senior Loeb scholar. Every year we invite a senior Loeb scholar who spends about a week with us, and this is organized through the Loeb's office with John Peterson, Sally, the whole team do a wonderful job, and they meet and spend time with the Loebs. And in fact, this week, Bruno is also spending time with the MDes program, with John May and some of the students, with Anita Berisbetia. So the idea is that the senior Loebs are basically engaged with the life of the school, and they don't just do one lecture, but we really benefit from their ideas and their interests in different kinds of contexts. This program has been going on for a number of years, and some of the other Loeb scholars that include Ulrich Beck, Arjuna Pudurai, Catherine Boo, David Harvey, and others. Before I introduce Bruno, I also want to take a minute to let you know that this Thursday, October 18th, the curator, Jose Esparza, will speak in Stubbins at lunchtime. He is the newly minted executive director and chief curator at Storefront for Architecture, and he will start on November 1st. Landscape architect and Option Studio faculty member Marty Poirier will give a lecture on Monday, October 22nd, and on Tuesday, October 23rd, our next Rouse Visiting Artist lecture of the semester features curator Julieta Gonzalez and visual artist Fritz Hag and Niels Norman. They will be in conversation about Hag and Norman's recent public art commission to design a plaza at the Museo Jumex in Mexico City, and the event will take place at 6:30 p.m. here in Piper Auditorium. In the light of last week's dire climate report issued by IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it feels really apt and timely to have Bruno here tonight to lecture on Gaiapolitics and the conceptual idea of the 7 planets. Bruno is no stranger to the GSD and indeed to Harvard. He's been working here, collaborating with colleagues like Peter Gallison in history of science for many years here at the GSD. He's been involved on a number of occasions. We had a wonderful event here with him and Peter Sloterdijk some years ago. And then we also collaborated on the beginnings of what is now our Master in Design Studies in Art, Design, and Public Domain, because Bruno, at that time, he was at Sciences Po, and he was also very interested in the relationship between what he called the political arts in France, and really having people with the background in the social sciences or maybe design coming into Sciences Po to study for a master's that really prepared them in a different way to address the question of the political arts in the context of Sciences Po. I think one of the key reasons why many of us are very keen on having Bruno here is because he's really a sort of worldly public intellectual who thinks about philosophy, anthropology, and other disciplines, but with a very worldly perspective. And more, a lot of his ideas have had connections to the way in which he's really thinking about the planet, what's happening to the planet, and our sort of actions, our responsibilities, and what kind of things can we do. It doesn't always directly translate to design, but I think it has many consequences for us in the context of a design school where we're really thinking about these broader issues where his work is very much about the interrelationship of things and the impact that things have on each other, including humans and non-humans. One of his, he has also published so many amazing books, and I think we want to hear from Bruno very quickly, but one of his probably better known books, most of them are very well known, is the book that we called We Have Never Been Modern, which was really an earlier book. But I think it's good if I read you maybe even the first paragraph from the back of the book to just give you a sense of how some of his thinking in relation to science is formed. He says, the book says, with the rise of science, we moderns believe the world changed irrevocably, separating us forever from our primitive, pre-modern ancestors. But if we were to let go of this fond conviction, Bruno Latour asks, what would the world look like? His book, An Anthropology of Science, shows us how much of modernity is actually a matter of faith. And I think there is a very beautiful description in a sense that for Bruno, it seems words and themes like alchemy, astrology, phrenology, they're also part of the very conceptions of the pre-modern, which maybe we should not let go of so quickly. And therefore, I think it's really interesting when you think about the idea of us being able to sort of think through issues or design in a way that doesn't bracket us in a very precise way and excludes other notions, other possibilities, and so on. As I said, Bruno spent a lot of time at the School of Mines in Paris, and then subsequently at Sciences Po, where he was responsible for research and set up the program, the Media Lab, and the program in the political arts. We are really, really delighted that he's here with us. There's a lot more to be said, but would you please join me in welcoming Bruno Latour?
The deafening silence coming from the White House after the new report from the IPCC, as Marjan just mentioned, 2 weeks ago, urging the United Nations to try, no matter how hard it appears to be, to keep the global temperature below the Paris Agreement target of 1.5 degrees, can be interpreted as another proof of anti-science attitude. But for the last 3 years, I've been more and more convinced that the continuous, coherent, and deeply entrenched climato-skepticism of the Republican Party should be seen as the mark of a great design in geopolitics, namely to redesign the United States as situated outside of the Earth and moving toward another attractor altogether. What used to be a lame joke, but my poor fellow, you seem to live on another planet, has become the strange goal of a new form of geopolitics. Yes, indeed. We do intend to live on another planet. Cultural historians would say that the US has always been somewhere else than the rest of the world, and certainly away from the old world and meshed into its all outdated attachment, and that it was constructed to be a land of nowhere, welcoming anybody. I mean, once the earlier inhabitants had been dispossessed, that is. But this outwardness or aloofness or special destiny was figurative only. It remains symbolic, as in the myth of the city on the hill and other such pretension. Today, it has become literal. Everything in politics happened as if a large chunk of the planet was moving somewhere else than the rest of the world, hoping to benefit from another climate and not to be submitted to the same forces of nature and, let's say, China or Indonesia. Prior to recent US proclamation, when historians talk about geopolitics, they meant different nations with opposite interests waging wars on the same material and geographical stage. But today, geopolitics is also concerned with wars about the very definition of a stage itself. A conflict will be called from now on, I propose, a planetary relevance, not because it has a planet for a stage, but because it's about which planet you are claiming to inhabit and to defend. And to register this shift in meaning, I use the word Gaiapolitics, since I've been trying over the years to resurrect the Lovelock-Margulis discovery of Gaia, a discovery that gains great importance today, in my eyes at least. I'm starting from the premise shared with Dipesh Chakrabarty and a few others that what I've called the new climatic regime organizes the whole of political affiliation. Tell me what you expect from the climate, and I will tell you where you stand on all other issues, including the social one. In Climate Leviathan, a political theory of our planetary future, two Marxist social scientists, Mann and Wainwright, started from the same premises as I, ending with 4 geopolitical scenarios, very much like my planet. They have one vivid illustration of planetary conflict with this image, showing New York City in 2012 without electricity in anticipation of Hurricane Sandy. I understand you have a much better one here, but I didn't know that. They are just Marxist scholars after all, they don't know. With only the Goldman Sachs Tower brightly lit thanks to its own generators. The same geographical space, that is the cartographic grid of Manhattan, is occupied by 2 different climatic regimes, one submitted to Hurricane Sandy, the other indifferent to it. Banks remain fully operational when everything else is coping with a hurricane. Like a rocket it looks, it's very funny at Cape Kennedy. Goldman Sachs is apparently ready for liftoff. The lesson is that on the same cartographic space, people belong to different soils or are grounded in a different land. This is typical, I argue, of the Gaiapolitics. The question of which people belong to which land is foregrounded again. As I argued at length in Facing Gaia, just as at the beginning of modern political philosophy at the time of Hobbes, we are no longer dealing with humans in nature, but with divided people engaged in civil wars, having to reinvent social order altogether. Climate mutation means that the question of the land on which we stand is back into focus. Everything happens as if Games of Thrones has become a general model for considering earthly politics, except, of course, that the threat is Armageddon and not winter is coming. In a long investigative essay in the New York Times that confirmed part of a chronology I propose in Down to Earth, Nathaniel Rich has offered in a detailed analysis of such a bifurcation. Just when proofs of a change in climate condition were accumulating as early as during the Reagan administration, Rich shows how efficient has been the enterprise to deny the coming Armageddon. The certainty about the threat, as well as the denial of the threat, have grown together. Some people have seen that the planet will never be the same if scientists were right, and they decided, I argue they decided somewhat consciously, that it was time to move to another one, where all the dramatic changes anticipated by scientists would not happen, or at least would not be visible, or would not modify the social order. Strangely enough, actually, Nathaniel Rich missed this point entirely in his own interpretation of the document he beautifully shows. This is why I think we have to link together 3 40-year-long episodes: deregulation, explosion of inequalities, and expansion of climate denial, which is the public of this just published Down to Earth. Whatever you might think of my interpretation, the crucial point is that the climate question is not one aspect of politics among others, but what defines political order from beginning to end, forcing all of us to redefine the older question of subsistence and attachment to places, as well as social justice. In recent years, if you want to summarize the argument, we have shifted from question of ecology, which is about natures outside of social order, to question of existential subsistence on threatened territories. Nature is no longer outside, but under our feet, and it shakes the ground. Hence, the general political disorientation, especially for the left, who did not expect to have to talk again of people and soil, question mostly abandoned to the right. I'm sure you will agree that taking kids to a planetarium is a compulsory moment of any education, to give them some sense of where they reside in the universe. to introduce them to planets, stars, Milky Way, galaxy, black holes, and other such esoteric entities. Well, I wish tonight to take you for a guided tour in my wholly fictional, That's it. English complicated for a Frenchman. Wholly fictional planetarium. It's a fiction, yes. Although one thing is sure, whereas all planetary influences on our horoscopes have been thrown into doubt for quite some time, there is no question that the gravitational pull of another 7 planets, by my reckoning there are 7 of them, have an immense influence on the way you feel, behave, and especially on the way you may predict your destiny. So let's take the tour as a fictional astrology verging on serious geopolitics. And as Moshe very kindly said, that there is no direct relation between architecture and design in my talk. You would have to do the job yourself of seeing the connection. But maybe there is one. The principle that would lead me in such a reckoning is the link between the territory necessary for our subsistence and the territory that we recognize legally, effectively as our own, and thus as the source of our freedom and autonomy. Territory here, not only in its geographic or administrative depiction, but also in what I call Gaia-graphic definition. That is, all of the other agents, no matter how remote, that allow a particular agent, human or non-human, to subsist. These are what its territory consists of. So it's a reverse, not the territory administrative, but give me the subsistence and I will know what the territory is. And subsistence has been taken in a very large sense. I will start from the assumption that the present disorientation is due to the fabulous increase in the usual lack of fit between the two sets of constraints. We inhabit as citizens a land that is not the one we could subsist on. Hence the increasing feeling of homelessness, a feeling that is transforming the former ecological question into a new set of more urgent and more tragic political struggles. People everywhere are again looking for land. A situation that I've called for this reason the new wicked universality. The first planet I will show shining in my little fictional planetarium is what could be called the global. That is the sphere imagined by the attempts at modernizing the Earth. If I call it an imaginary sphere, it's for the reason so forcefully advanced by Peter Sloterdijk. Although it had properties drawn from cartography, geology, and some geography, it's a sphere of ideas, since it implies that everyone on Earth could develop according to the American way of life and forever, and in the absence of any limit. It's the globalization as a positive utopian or dystopian ideal which has been pursued and still has some attraction until the end of the 20th century. And of course, there is another side to the story of this global planet, and that it's entirely colonized, in the sense that none of the nation composing its map occupies the official space inside its borders and frontier. China, Europe, the United States, all occupy territories, all occupy the official space inside, all occupy other territory in many ways, either forcibly or through the partially hidden means of phantom acreage, to use Kenneth Pomeranz's powerful expression. And you know many of his images on type of maps. This is what Pierre Charbonnier called the ubiquity of the modern, to underline that there is no correspondence at all to expect between the shape of a nation-state in the legal sense and the wealth its citizens benefit from. Belonging to a territory on such a global planet is a sure way of being misled and lost. Your health or your misery come from places that are invisible on the administrative map of your own land. And in addition to this imbalance in space, there is, as Timothy Mitchell has argued, an imbalance in time, since the future in the global is entirely colonized in advance, so to speak, by decision made earlier to develop infrastructure, putting you forever in debt. The dispute on what to do about getting rid of our carbon economy is a good case in point, since most investment decisions, as it has been showed recently, have already been made. So paradoxically, no matter if they are rich or poor, inhabitants of this global have no way to influence their own future. TINA, there is no alternative, is a practical result, which is paradoxical, of centuries of obsession with the question of emancipation and freedom. So the global is simultaneously that toward which the whole world was supposed to progress, and a totally utopian, skewed domain where time and space have been colonized to the point of rendering it unhabitable and of paralyzing any reaction to the threat everyone clearly sees coming. This is nicely emphasized in the well-known argument, as you know, I'm sure, about the 5 planets necessary to develop further in a non-American fashion, or in moving the date of a calendar earlier and earlier every year to celebrate Earth Overshoot Day. France, by the way, overshoot in May 5th, and you will not be surprised to know that you do that in March 15th. So France has still a month less responsibility, but it's very small. I've often noted this contradiction. Even though the modern are supposed to be hard-nosed realists and to possess a fully materialistic outlook, their vision of where they were supposed to be inhabitant remained entirely ideal all along. In this imaginary global sphere, there were no specified climate condition, no earthly limits, no idea of the complexity and heterogeneity of the soil, no feel for what allows any life forms to live. And I'm sure architects feel the pull of that planetary attraction. The paradox is that this global, that is the horizon for everything universal, they say, is also a cramped space, with no people able to really say in it, this is where I belong, and it is from here that I draw my subsistence and where I find the sources of my liberties. You expect to meet free people, and they sit on their butt, paralyzed, unable to react to a small question like the climate transformation. For the last 40 years, this planet has felt the increasing gravitational pull, so to speak, of another one, which has been named, and I think it's a good word, by Chakrabarty, the planetary. It's different from a global precisely because it began to rematerialize all the elements that had been left aside a bit too fast by those who had embarked in the great progressive movement toward the global. All that was externalized in one planet is internalized in this one. The planetary is the global, but where the Earth is reacting to human enterprise. No longer a frame, a stage, but a powerful actor with its own agency and its own tempo. And also at a scale, and that's where the surprise comes from, at a scale that is comparable in size and weight to that of the human technosphere. And its presence is now captured, this is very well-known, expressions as Earth system, or Lovelock Gaia, or Anthropocene, or great acceleration, tipping point, Earth boundary, there are many of them. A whole vocabulary that has transformed what was to have been a theater stage that could be changed by human ingenuity into a player intervening as a third party in every human activity. The key point is that it's not nature as such whose immensity indifference, aloofness, importance, and other compassing weight had always been celebrated, but an agent with its own force and power that requests to be integrated in some ways into the political domain. Facing Gaia is altogether different than facing nature. How to define the planetary, if I use my little reckoning principle, detect the overlap of territory and subsistence? On the face of it, it should be the great solution to the radical homelessness suffered on the planet global. The human, now as big as the Earth, is easily superimposed to a planetary system of comparable size in such a way that all questions of freedom and governance and representation are also questions of subsistence. You depend on the whole planet? Well, the whole planet is reacting to your action. And yet, there is no such overlap, for a reason that Chakrabarty has tried to disentangle since his first famous paper on four physics. A good locus from this, to see this, is to consider the great Anthropocene quarrel. As soon as the term Anthropocene was used in geology, climatology, biochemistry, and stratigraphy by natural scientists, it was immediately criticized by social scientists for its complete insensitivity to the complex history of human society. There was indeed a rematerialization of conditions of our subsistence, and a welcome one at that, but everyone agreed that the anthropos of the Anthropocene was too much of an abstraction to provide a real superposition of a legal and social question of freedom and autonomy upon the earthly condition of subsistence. Although it was better to live in the Anthropocene than suspended in mid-air, as in the global, with an Earth offshoot day somewhere in March or May, the point was that geologists and biochemists were not offering any view of an Earth that citizens and activists could recognize as their home. Although the principles of homelessness were tackled, there was now a material earth under the feet of people. Those people had no abode where they could express their conditions in terms compatible with the goal of social justice. Humans were mainly plugged in as box in the model developed by Earth System Science in the Potsdam Institute or the IPGP or IPCC. A box, just like the one for soil, vegetation, or ocean currents. So in spite of Gaia's pull, planetary could be felt as another attempt at naturalizing social life. That is, for social scientists, as the end of the human world. And that planetary was seen as really the end of a human domination can be shown by looking at two other darker bodies which are coming frighteningly close to the planetary. Planets, the gravitational fields of which could engulf all the others, as in a replay of Lars von Trier, Melancholia. Melancholia, as you know, but finished badly, if you have not seen the film. If you have not seen the film, I'm sorry to spoil it. The first of the two dark planets to consider is the one I call escape. Considering that it becomes barely thinkable to imagine any harmony between the resource necessary for subsistence and the exercise of freedom, some have concluded that the two main assumptions of modernism should be abandoned altogether. Freedom is for the few, not for the many. Breaking from the limits of nature is the essential destiny of those few only. Hence the name escape. Let's forget about the universality of a modern dream, still entertained by people on planet global. And let's accelerate the break away from earthly condition. If we wanted a simile of such a liftoff in addition to the picture of the New York's Goldman Sachs Tower I showed earlier, I think Elon Musk's red Tesla car sent in space would be a good signpost. Although it superficially resembles the modernist ideal of expanding in science ad infinitum, it's much more sinister, as Musk himself recognized when he said of his enterprise, "It is silly, but it's fun." To my ears, with what was supposed to be a joke, he broke any continuity with the former ideals of progress for all. This is indeed another planet. On Planet Escape, the plan is that it will soon be possible to download our mortal bodies into mixtures of robots, DNA, clouds, AI, lots of AI, situated as far as possible from the humble and limited Earth. Technology, after all, is transcendence. It needs no Earth, except as a provisional platform before new adventures begin. On to Mars! In case those accelerations evaporate as so much hype, if, for instance, terraforming of Mars takes more time than anticipated, it might be wise to buy a gated community or underground bunker somewhere, preferably, as this article shows, in New Zealand. A real material, well-protected terroir, down on an old, already terraformed Earth. Wherever the gated community ends up being situated, the great difference between the global and Planet Escape is that there is no longer any project for the billions of humans who are explicitly now left behind. Or to use this cruel but frank adjective, who have become supernumerary. It's an extraordinary word, supernumerary. Civilization, in the sense of a project invented by liberals at the time of the English Revolution, is now abandoned for good. The simple question remains, where with all those supernumerary masses go? All those left behind. There is no difficulty in finding where they are heading. It's in the news every morning, especially after election day. When it's not in Brazil, it's in Hungary. When it's not in Hungary, it's in Germany or England or France or Italy or Bavaria last Sunday. You name it. And of course, it happens even here in this benighted country of yours, that is made simultaneously great again, and if I'm allowed to say, much smaller. Here, there is another planet. Let's call it identity. That is actually today the biggest planet of all. The one that overshadows, it seems, all the others. Where do the millions of people go? In one direction and one only, wherever they would like, so long as they remain behind walls. So they can retain at least one element of a former civilizing project: protection and identity. Although troubling for the inhabitants of the other world, the migration is perfectly reasonable. If prosperity and freedom are gone, and if it's impossible, as scientists insist, to connect prosperity and Earth condition together, then let's at least have an identity, a sense of belonging. It doesn't solve the question of a superposition between subsistent territory and freedom. Maybe not. But the promises of a global have been left aside anyway. Modernization is stuck. Inequalities are growing every day. And to top it all, we have been betrayed by those, the inhabitants of escape, who are flying toward Mars without us. Mars, or New Zealand, that is. They don't even pretend to work for our benefit. Noah's Ark is for them, not for us. They abandon us, we abandon them. The avant-garde has been left to hang out by itself. No one follows them anymore. And you might feel this anti-gravitational pull here in Cambridge. The leaders don't lead anymore. They have all been replaced by others. Planet identity's attraction seems to be overwhelming. Everybody dreams of being inside a neo-national or neo-local bounded space, even though it might mean abandoning any pretense at maintaining the civilizing project of the recent past. On Planet Global, there was, remember, a fundamental disconnect between the legal border and the real territory they had to command in order to subsist. But their horizon remained global, and their ideal was still that of coordination and shared sovereignty. They were in an awkward position, to be sure, but sort of cantilevered on top of an abyss. But they had at least the project of coping with it. And of course, the best example of such intention is the hapless but still admirable effort of the climate conferences, the famous COP, culminating in the Paris Agreement in December 2015. But on planet identity, as well as planet escape, there is no need for such a horizon. As we know from the decision of the present administration to withdraw from the Paris Agreement, climate denial is constitutive to this project. Those who criticize modernity are going to regret it when considering the ravages committed by that long withdrawal inside the walls of identity. While on escape, it's technology that is supposed to be the saving hand of God, on identity, there is not even that hope. Actually, hope is no longer a possibility. You cannot even say there, it's silly, but it's fun. Above all other attitude, it's rage and despair that are valued most, which makes sense, since homelessness is pushed to its most extreme expression. The desperate effort to possess an identity, but without any realist material ground to settle on and provide a soil. Populists are people, yes, but without a land. If I leave off here the guided tour for my fictional planetarium, chances that you are going to witness the same roaring scene as in Melancholia, planet crashing into another. But fortunately, don't despair, there are 3 other planets, the complex interferences of which are making themselves felt in addition to the 4. Of course, just like good planets do in our solar system, they all act on one another. So every one of our issues today, no matter if we wish to build something or design any situation or make any plan, settle any controversy, is pushed and pulled, divided and influenced by the overlapping, contradictory and still unsettled fields of attraction of those 7 bodies. 4 that I've described plus 3 that I'm about to turn to. Right now, the probability they will coalesce to make one common world is nil. And I would say fortunately, because the largest of all, identity, is probably the darkest and least promising one to unify the political situation. So, what are the others? Planet World is still influential. By this label, I mean what has been the project of various civilizations, mainly Europe, but also China, India, to project their own boundaries onto those of the others. The result of those many and contradictory globalization deserve the name world, not terribly good, because they are all meant to add to their own borders, those of their legal expression of freedom and autonomy, a vastly greater expanse of people, lands, morals, resources, and goods, which they simultaneously integrated, of course knowledge, scientific knowledge is a good example, and maintained outside as foreign and exterior. For Europeans at least, it could be called the planet Galileo or Descartes, to mark more clearly a change in the very composition of the material with which the body of a planet is being made, and a new position in relation to the sun. A type of worldling that was not so detectable before what is called, in quotation mark, the age of discoveries, or with even more scare quotes, the scientific revolution. A fabulous expansion of the world, but without any similar expansion of a feeling of identity. Hence the strange situation of otherness, which has been always co-evolving with the sentiment of modernity. The predicament of those who have never been modern is that transform the others into others. You could object that this is then exactly the same planet as the global, with its growing cantilever or disconnect between the legal and the lived territory. But this would be to confuse the Earth before and after the main event, that is the introduction of carbon, coals and colonies, to use Pomeran's expression again. What is becoming clearer and clearer to historians, viewed from a planetary's point of view, is that there is not much continuity between the first and the second modernizing project, let's say between the 18th and then 19th and 20th, with coal and oil. The asymmetries in power between discovering and discovered people were important before, but surmountable compared to those of a second period, where any encounter ran the risk of annihilation for the discovered. Inhabitants of a planet world were pilfering other society, yes, but they could not portray, you could not portray them as, in the new one, as agent of a sixth extension. To use Timothy Mitchell's expression, they could not render the link to the Earth invisible. On the contrary, they entrenched more and more the notion of development and civilization within a newly material and complex world they delighted in figuring out. Economics was still an art of dealing with prudence and limits, not yet what could render invisible the condition of subsistence and infinite the profit. This is Mitchell's argument, as you know, in Carbon Democracy. It's carbon that has transformed what was a strike of chance, a lucky boon, basically, into a destiny. Without carbon, Europe's expansion was an intrusion, yes, complicating the ways of life of all sorts of other empires, as post-colonial studies have so elegantly shown, but with carbon, it became, to use the Verglin term, an apocalypse of civilization. Although word seems slightly weakened, outdated, backward version of a global and of a planetary, the same cannot be said about what I've called in Down to Earth the terrestrial. The terrestrial is at once that toward which it seems that all progressive political movements are heading, and yet, this is funny, what is terribly difficult to define. Mann and Wainwright, the guy I mentioned earlier, call it X. Lenton and I, in a recent paper in Science, call it Gaia 2.0. Anna Tsinks called it living in ruins of capitalism. And Chakrabarty, after all these years, is still struggling to give it a name. Paradoxically, the main attractor does not seem to be so attractive. And yet, using the same grid as for the other planet, it seems to offer finally some sort of a solution to the homelessness detected as a source of a general disorientation. It overlays the strange shape of territory, and remember, territory is whatever life form, the source for any life form, whatever, and as far as remote as it is, that allows it to subsist. Atop a territory understood as what free agent can decide on their own. If Anna Tsing's book takes on more and more importance, it's because it's probably the first to show in enough detail how such superposition is possible, even though mushrooms at the end of the world fit none of the earlier categories of nation-state, sovereignty, capitalism, class struggle, but renew all of those terms. Why would it be different then from the planetary whose presence and influence has been growing since the 1960s. Precisely because it might offer a solution to the great Anthropocene quarrel I mentioned earlier. You cannot insert into politics any sort of natural entity without transforming the search for freedom and autonomy into the simple domination of necessity and heteronomy. I know. I've tried everything for 40 years. It never worked, believe me. So to tell humans that they behave just like a geological force, as the Committee for the Anthropocene does so regularly and beautifully, and even though it's technically true, the scales are correct, the influence is undisputable, the effect devastating, it's not something that any political agent can hear without ceasing to be a human political agent. In becoming geology, it's impossible. Anthropocenic, can we say that? Anthropocenic human have become as immobile and as paralyzed as statues of salt. But where did we learn that freedom was reserved to human life form? Where did we learn that freedom was reserved to human life form? This is where the discovery of Lovelock and Margulis Gaia comes in. Gaia, we wrote a series of papers with Linton, I don't have time to get into that. Gaia is not Earth system science. It's a much more interesting and astute sort of being. I have no room to develop, unfortunately, the idea fully, but the key element we need here is the knowledge that all life forms have in common that they make up their own laws. They make up their own laws. They don't obey rules made elsewhere. The key discovery of Lovelock Margulis is that life forms don't reside in space and time, but that time and space is the result of their own entanglement. So, although reconcile the realm of necessity and that of freedom is a waste of time, connecting free agents with free agent opens up completely different styles of association and allows the building of different society. Basically, the terrestrial is the same body as the planetary, but where the politicization of nature has finally taken over. So it's a very important shift. If I'm slightly confident in the gravitational pull of this sixth planet, I mean, slightly, very slightly, it's for a reason that is not visible until you bring all of them together in a spatial is a word impossible to say for a friend, right? Spatial like space, okay? Spatial consideration. Just as fictional as the rest, of course, but after all, it's not function what is needed at this moment to focus our attention. And it's a nice diagram, isn't it? In this diagram, done by Alexandra Arendt, you will notice that the terrestrial is pulled toward the gravitational field of a seventh planet I have not mentioned yet, and that I am strangely tempted to call contemporary. Why do I name it that way? Why do I end up with it, although it's also clear that it should have been the first to consider? Precisely because it has never been allowed to be freed from the retrospective judgment of the 5 other planets. Whenever it's treated first, it becomes primitive. Wherever people talk about modernity, they immediately create, by contrast, a primeval site, that of archaic attachment to the soil, to the ground, which is either ridicule as that out of which the whole civilizing trajectory has been extricating itself, so to speak, or what is even worse, it's celebrated as being a mythical, archaic, primordial, autochthonous, or earth, freed from all the tragic sins of civilized human. Remember Husserl with the earth that doesn't move? Heidegger with the lived earth? If there is one lesson to draw from the extraordinary rebirth of anthropology in recent time, it's that for probably the first time in anthropology called 200 years, probably because of a symmetric pool of the terrestrial, actually, the many societies of human and non-human that are active on the earth are allowed to stop having to define themselves by comparison with modernity, or to be taken only as having rich symbolic views of nature. With what has been called, probably misleadingly, the ontological turn, they are free at last to be our contemporaries. Difficult to pronounce, maybe I should find another name for it. Contemporaries. Modern look better, but contemporaries is better. And maybe also to exchange some of the recipes they might have for composing societies made of free agents. As Vivero de Castro is fond of saying, what is sure is that those societies of human and non-human are expert at survival. And now they have their own planet, and they can fight back. It's about time we move from modernity to contemporaneity, that is, to the present. Let me now conclude the tour guide of my fictional planetarium with 3 very short remarks. The first is that there is not, as you see here, 1 but 3 or 4 different arcs of history. And modernity is really very small, probably something, see, it's a very short movement. Already here it begins to turn, and then chook, and then chook, and then here, attraction pull, and then here. So there are many different arcs. So we are getting rid of modernity, which is, I mean, for architects as well as for philosophers, it would be so good. Modernism appears now as a small parenthesis that went from world to global, and which is now torn apart by 2 radically different gravitational pulls. One by what I've called the dark planet, escape and identity, and even though they have a majority, of course, and the other by those who are rematerializing the Earth in different but complementary fashion, namely planetary and terrestrial. Architects and designers, I'm sure, may now understand that to the project of designing for the planet should be added some qualification. Yes, but for which planet? The second remark is that it's no wonder that we feel politically disoriented. Those 7 planets make their influence felt at the same time over every one of us and modify the path of our enterprise minute by minute. We are not divided in 2, forward or backward, but at least in 7. Every time we choose a course of action, utter an opinion, we feel engaged or repulsed by the weight of those bodies. Every act, no matter how simple, has become contentious. The third and final remark is that if my geopolitics map is even vaguely coherent, it should be clear that there is a general movement not to go back to the past. Moving forward or backward was a typically modernist conceit during this short moment here, segment. But we move, I think, I don't know, you architects, you're always very good at capturing this sort of mood or style. We move from more outside or more inside. There is a sort of insiderness that is making itself felt, and that is visible in science as well, I think, as in the art, and that I pursue in some of my projects. And this is a bit of publicity for what I'm doing next week in New York. Well, that's the end. Thank you very much.
So hopefully we can have some questions. One thing, I think there's some mics, so maybe people can raise their hands and we can. One thing, Bruno, is that in architecture and in design schools, the word contemporary is very common.
Okay.
And contemporaneity is very common.
Okay, my fault.
Which is very interesting, no? Because I think that the struggle is not the struggle of overcoming modernity, but it's really the struggle of addressing the questions of the contemporary or the questions of contemporaneity in a way that addresses the question of spatial, but the spatial in a way that is not just about space, but it's about the relationality of the spatial in a way that entangles those who are also engaged in it. So the user or the participant or something like this. So that question of contemporaneity with the spatial also exists at multiple scales, because we are designing, let's say, a room or a house, and we have to think about the specificity of that particular moment, but we are also thinking about the scalar condition of the spatial, where the thing that we're working on, whether it's a house or a landscape or a part of a city, also exists as an exemplar of a bigger project. Therefore, the thing is also indicative of a bigger project, of a responsibility which is larger than the specific thing that we are working on. So I think that question of the sort of the scalar is also something interesting. And one thing that I didn't say is that you, as is evident, it's a pity that the diagram has disappeared, but you constantly work with visual material, you work with exhibitions, and you've been using exhibitions in a way to also promote the kind of ideas that you have. So one thing that would be interesting is really for us to also now try to get to, like, which is wonderful. I mean, it was really great to hear this kind of description of conditions, to the moment when one can also construct a certain set of conditions in response, so that we are not escaping. We are not moderns. And therefore, somewhere around the space of the terrestrial to the contemporary, there is also a project. There is something, presumably, that is made, right? And how is that? For us, it's not so funny. we have to do this constantly.
Just your life is complicated because if you have a project here, it's pulled and pushed by all of these things simultaneously.
Exactly, but this is also part of the project of design.
Okay.
So design has to negotiate with this.
So there was some relation.
So I'm trying to. Okay. Yeah, there is some relation to design. But I want to ask you about the word melancholy. Because in the way that you referred to the movie, the word melancholy is a condition of sadness, purely, and it's the bad end. But also melancholia has been used as a specially induced condition which can be very productive. Melancholia as a mode of reflection, as a way of producing a kind of project. Do you feel that there is a possibility for melancholia to also provide some kind of a space of projection, or a space of sort of thinking that provides at least temporal, not solution, but temporal suggestions, recommendations for the contemporary to exist in different ways? Or how would you construct a sort of project beyond the contemporary?
Well, how to construct a project, I don't know, but there is this word by a psychiatrist from Australia called solastalgia, which is it's close to, but it's a specific condition that this guy in Australia found, and Australia, as you know, is destroyed by ecological transformation and doesn't pay any attention to it, which is precisely this, the feeling of hopelessness at home. The feeling that the earth is actually disappearing under your feet and that you are powerless. So just my very simple scheme. I mean, homelessness is a very old and very traditional question of cultural ideas, just like melancholia. But there is something specific. If my argument that all politics is linked to this question of a new climatic regime is visible. So that's what I say. So all of this question about project, about multiplicity of position to take simultaneously into account, this is as old as building anything. But what is new is this situation that we now disagree even on the common world in which all of these projects are taking place. We disagree, we don't disagree inside space and time, we disagree about space and time. And it's different, for example, the planetary, which is all the sort of big ESS science, Earth system science, is also different from the terrestrial. It's also different from the others. This is just a dispute which is simultaneously inside the science, inside our own psychological makeup, and that's where the solastalgia can get in, and which produce what I call wicked universality. That is, basically, we talk now to people who have lost their land in a way. Those who are losing the land and move, and those, they come inside. This is very important for Europeans, as you know, because of the migration crisis. And they talk to people inside France, Germany, Bavaria, etc., who feel also that the Earth is also moving. And that's the new situation, which is much more tense because of a planet identity, which is a general movement everywhere simultaneously in the world, from Indonesia to Brazil, which, I mean, there's a massive phenomenon here, which is so important for geopolitics and political science, which is all of the leaders in all of these nation states have been eliminated. Why? I mean, what's happening? I mean, the drag before the pull of a global horizon had hidden all of this division. But now that the pull is no longer there, then no one leads anymore. So I'm trying just to make sense of what does the new climatic regime does to all sorts of old questions, basically. So including, of course, melancholia and all of these traditional questions of design probably are influenced by it. I mean, it's a very simple argument.
Well, it's not that simple.
Even though it looks a bit strange. You know? No. It is a simple argument. Don't you feel this homelessness? Of course, homelessness is very general, but a specific type of hopelessness. If you read last week, IPCC report, do something, 1.5 degrees. 2 weeks before, it was 15,000 scientists saying it's soon too late. 1 month before, it was 30% of the species are going, of the insect species have disappeared, of the bird, sorry. And so on and so forth. What does all of this news do to the psychological makeup of people? This is what this diagram is about. My argument is that even if you are denier or indifferent, it eats your brain and your heart, and it does something which explains for me the brutalization of politics. Because you cannot possibly understand how you can do anything, nor can you relate to this news, which nonetheless the scientists are producing. Denial and skepticism is just one version of it. I mean, it's a simple version, which is in a way fairly understandable, but it has something more psychosocial in it, and that's what I try to capture, even though it's not my discipline.
I'm sure I'd like to give a chance to other people. Please, go ahead.
Thank you for once again reminding us of the continuing importance of semiotics in science, both with regard to what science operates upon and what it produces in terms of contemporary culture. I am astonished, though, that your fictional representation, your planetarium of things contemporary, should be connected to a climatic outcome that you describe as a climatic regime, as a thing. Because the problem with climate models, as with all models, is that they are not things.
They are not what?
They are not things. They are metaphysical representations of what one hopes is reality. Mm-hmm. As someone who publishes in climate science journals, I'm acutely aware of this, and acutely disturbed that one should elide the political project, which has been ongoing for over a generation, since Earth Day, with the actual state of the art, or the lack of it, in the models that to which we attribute the future condition of the world.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, you are then on planet. Where are you then? Escape?
No,
The planet where the climate.
on planet complexity.
Yes. Okay. Well. Okay. But the whole argument is based on the idea that there is something about the new climatic regime which does make that. You notice that I use new climatic regime. I don't use Anthropocene so much, because precisely Anthropocene would lead us into the stabilization of all these models, which are always models, as you say. But new climatic regime is a word which is much more closer from law and politics, like new regime, old, at least for a Frenchman, old regime, new regime, it means something. So this is why I use this expression. It does something to the way we organize our politics. And this is why Rich is interesting, because it was seen immediately by the Reagan administration. They immediately saw the relevance, even though 30 years ago it was not as certain as it is now. And we immediately link it to it. The head of, I forgot the name of the head of, I don't know what Peter thinks of this article, but it was an interesting thing. Immediately, the core evolution of denial and certainty, so they grow together. The more you're certain, the more you deny. That's an interesting phenomenon for science relations.
Can you talk a little bit just about the diagram and the necessity of separation versus the relationality of the elements to each other?
Can you switch it off? Because I don't want to have to answer this question because...
You don't want to? Okay, Peter, you asked the question. No, but I think it's interesting that within the worldly, which is contemporary,
that's why I was talking with architects.
You have identity and escape simultaneously, and you don't necessarily always have them.
No, we are all this planet. Every one of us, we are all this planet simultaneously. Of course.
Okay,
yes. No, I'm sorry to say. No, sorry, he took it seriously. We want it back. No, the only thing I would keep from the diagrams is the interesting curve. Because what I'm trying to interest you, architect, to the insiderness. Mm-hmm. You see, it's not forward or backward, it's inside or outside. I mean, what happened with the pull to be inside, which is one very interesting thing I'm doing with scientists now who work on what I call critical zone. I'm doing an exhibition on that, actually, and interested in developing, if any one of you had idea, the link which what you would call landscape and what those scientists call critical zone, which is an interesting interface I'm trying to develop. So okay, anyway.
Bruno is looking for volunteers. So there is somebody here.
So one of the things that strikes me about the diagram is that it's all circles and spirals, except for the terrestrial. That, that there's a way in which something happens at the open-ended question mark headed arrow that leads through the terrestrial. And the terrestrial has a kind of superposition of a cross-section of the Earth, maybe, and a Mondrian painting, a kind of Broadway boogie-woogie. And that put me in mind of thinking of, the planet of the sprawl, of the urban in a transnational way, in which we have all these connections with airplanes and trains between cities, and the great opposition that we feel, which is astonishing to me at this late date, between the rural and the urban, that we feel so strongly in France, in Germany, in Brexit, in Trump's election. I mean, constantly this sense of the cities form a kind of planet that exists, that being rejected hugely outside of the cities and contested in the suburban regimes that surround them. And I wondered, in thinking about this moment of the Anat Singh ruins of our own societies that you put up late in the talk, as you came to the terrestrial, and how you think about this this overlay in the Gaia world of the built environment
You mean this
in
one,
there. The sort of the world of a constructed world inside this very thin, this razor thin layer of
Well,
the Gaia.
it's an artifact actually of Alexandra. Alexandra wrote a paper with me. I mean, she's the first author in Anthropocene Review on Gaiagraphy, which is this shows she took it. It's actually a very clever, but of course it's invisible here, inversion of the notion of a planet. So she reused that. I mean, it's completely opaque in this diagram. I'm really sorry. So it ends up as a square. But it's actually a very, now I feel in what you say, another question, which is, of course, that those three actually are, of course, half cities, technospheres. I mean, is completely abandoning the opposition between the land and but the land, I was talking about the soil, I was mentioning the earth. We don't have the right word, is of course, all of those are I mean, concept. I mean, they are a very important concept, but it's very difficult actually, this is the whole problem, to represent something which is realistically what is the subsistence condition of the people today. And that's the source of disorientation in my little argument there. And the disorientation is bigger every day when we learn about what the scientists are telling us.
Please, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. The title of your talk reminds of a quote by one of your peers, there is no world, only islands, which seems to underscore
There is no world, only what?
There is no world, only islands.
Only ions.
Ions?
Islands.
Islands.
Islands, sorry, I'm sorry.
So there is no world, only islands, which seems to underscore the impossibility for a common ground, which is what characterizes postmodern thinking. In the wake of 2008, the crash...
Who is my peer here? I didn't get...
Jacques Derrida.
Okay. Very honored to be a peer of Jacques Derrida.
In the wake of the crisis, scholars concerned with post-capitalism, beyond capitalism, identify the political problem of one no, but many yeses. A new generation of scholars dissatisfied with this aspect of postmodern thinking.
Sorry, but is there a question?
Yes. So
Can
the
you
question.
just ask it as a question, though.
The question
Because
is.
he needs to follow.
Yes. The question is if you could elaborate on the idea of universalism, which you briefly touched upon during your lecture.
Well, one of the, I mean, I don't know if we can go very far in this very strange planetology, but of course one of them is that everyone has a different metrics. This is what he alluded to in the beginning. I mean, the metric is very, very different in each of them. And the other thing is, of course, the notion of universality is different. But the way I use the word wicked universality is precisely inside this argument that the sharing is not, we have the same common world, we will find the solution to climate change and to all the other things because we have the same set of principles and we have problems, then we have a solution because it's a common world. If this is universality, then it's gone, and the island that you mentioned. But there is a wicked universality back in, so to speak, and I'm doing an exhibition now on that precise question, which is, which is Qing, really, argument. We collaborate on this new ground, literally, which is you lost your ground, we lost our ground. How do you do it? How do we do it? And that's where opening another, I mean, universality is a very different term, except we share, it's a diplomatic, I'm trying to define the word diplomacy in anthropology around that. It's a diplomatic encounter of people who have lost their land, because many of these, apart from the two last one, I mean, all of them are lost their land. There is complete asymmetry or cantilever between the two. So it opens a space of discussion and rituals and all sort of things to be invented, and for which there are, as you know, many artists working on that, which is how do we share the condition of having lost the land? And trying not to be all in the identity planet. I mean, this is really, if we are not able to find ways to talk to the people who are massively migrating to identity. What we do, especially in university, is just wasted, so to speak. So this is why it's so important to really find a way to share. You lost your mind and your land. We do it too. Okay, now how do we build from that? Something which actually you mentioned Derrida, the whole reflection of Derrida on Algeria, his past, etc., could resonate with this if you are interested. I don't know what Derrida would have done with the new climatic regime, actually. It would be interesting.
Yes.
We'll come to you. One second.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at the Ori model, kind of the series of spatial bodies that are agglomerated in their relations. And there's a few things that I've been thinking of. One is that some now seem to be qualified spatially and others are yet waiting for a spatial reference, although maybe that's embedded in the way you've presented them. So maybe the escape being that space capsule or the thing that leaves the main body ejected outside. Because I'm a bit, I feel that the word global, planetary, and terrestrial have a strong geographic or spatial imaginary, and escape, identity, and contemporary are still waiting for them to have a kind of a clearer, maybe spatial references, a body that we can imagine. Is it an island? Is it a satellite? Is it a capsule? The thing that leaves or the thing that rotates? But what I feel is that there is that void that the blue marble image has left for us as that fixation of an image of that which brings us, that synthetic image, and a desire to fill that void with some reference. You mentioned the Earth a few times in that conversation, and the titles of your recent book is Down to Earth, or Où atterrir, and it seems somehow that after the terrestrial, the Earth leaves the picture, but the contemporary stays. So one question is, on these bodies, where's the Earth, if it is any of these spatial references? The other is the incentive the invitation, the underlying invitation that there is the shift to the terrestrial requires the politicization of nature as one that has taken over. And I'm wondering what acts, what are possible routes, invitation, what is the arrow? What is the arrow? What is the actual force? What is the action that can allow us to move from one spatial body to a next one? What could be possible actions that allow that politicization of nature to take over? How can we, I mean, if the image of the revolution is not anymore the one, or the march, or the writing, or the drawing, or the speaking, or, you point to the void that the intellectual has. What are the actions that could allow us to shift the forces?
Can you hold that thought, and I get one more question, and then you answer both at the same time? Do you think you can do that?
I'm in your hands. I do whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
And especially health is complicated. So if I can get
why.
out of that one, I would be happy.
Well, I hope I can help you. I think my question does overlap a little with that.
Can you then answer her? It would be great if you could answer her.
But maybe this will be an escape hatch. I really loved your mapping, your descriptions. All those worlds had the great satisfying click of recognizability, but except for identity. And I felt, because I live on and off in France, and I felt there was something really, really French about your sense of identity as a kind of enclosed consciousness of rage and despair. I have this argument all the time when I'm in France with people. In the United States, it is often a very, very, the word has very different connotations of community. Okay, just hold on, let me just finish. So, of community, which is something which is agential and can often produce changes that are beneficial. We are all sitting here hoping that certain communities are going to at least prevent the deepening hold of fascism over our government. Maybe we're crazy too, but But I just wonder if you have thought through your world identity in terms of how that concept works in places besides La République. And if you could help me understand it better.
Well, I'm a bit French, so it explains.
But you're talking universals. So
And also because, I think you're perfectly right, I should drop identity actually completely. Because I try precisely to avoid the word which would be accusatory in any sense, like populism and so on, and identity. You're right. It becomes community when we talk about something completely different. But I'm aware now that you said that I projected some French things there, and also because the tragedy in Europe maybe is more tense. Well, actually, it's tense here too. But I think, Madam, you're perfectly right. So I will drop identity immediately from revision. But I need a better term. So, and I mean, no, because we want to keep this word positive. Because, I mean, escape, I don't try to be, because, I mean, I can't be fair with these guys, but the accelerationist are the one who simultaneously go to Mars and to New Zealand. I mean, I can't. But identity, okay.
We'll discuss. So what about the Earth?
Well, the Earth is the term which would have been unifying the whole thing when we had a common world, which we no longer have. So that's the prime, which is, of course, every one of these planet or representation had a view of the Earth as a common, but there are several, so it's gone. It's gone. It opened a diplomatic space, but it's gone in the sense that if you begin, I mean, this gentleman, the first question, obviously, is in a world in which the models and the climate is not the big question. So what it is to be in a situation where what is the main conditions of the temperature of a modernist project is not unifiable. And you cannot play again the goal of saying, well, this is just archaic and obscurantist and anti-science, because it's inside science. The IPCC report of 2 weeks ago is inside the sciences, and there are other people who say no. So the whole link also between the state, scientific authority, leadership, vanguard, all of that has been sort of broken. So it's very difficult now to say, well, the Earth is this or the Earth is that. And yet, every day in the newspaper, scientific or otherwise, you get the news that it's going to be too late, it's going to be too late, it's going to be too late, it's going to be too late. And we stay on our butt. With this extraordinary situation that it's not a big deal. I mean, it is solvable. It's not an enormous thing, but it's a decision not to act. And this is something which breaks down the unity of course, the unity was, of course, fictional, but the apparent unity of the common world in which everybody would have the same space, and then we would find solutions, basically. Problem solving. But you wrote a whole book on this question, actually, and which has a stylistic. Everyone would have his style. So we need one. We wrote one book, but we need 7. It would be interesting to see, actually, the stylistic difference. And Alexandra is a bit working on that. She's actually now in an architectural school in Manchester with Albina Yaneva.
Oh, yeah. And
she's doing a PhD on this question of representation of Gaia. So there's hope for architects.
As long as there's hope for philosophy, I'm sure there will be hope for architecture too.
Well, no philosophers will leave that philosophy. I mean,
but
you have to be French to do this experiment.
By the way, one word that's used in the context of the university in lieu of identity is belonging.
Belonging, you need a soil.
I know, but belonging is not necessarily, no, it's not only referring to the soil. Belonging, also belonging to a community, a group, which is part of, not dissimilar to identity. It's not belonging to that ground, it's belonging in terms of...
You need a ground to have a belonging, no?
Not necessarily. Belonging is also in terms of affiliation, associations, things like that. But we can discuss it later on. Anyway, thank you, Bruno. Thank you all very much for coming.